Hey, good people, it's Sammy Ashe, Executive Director of the Ashe Academy, and your host of our Inspire, Uplift, Engage podcast. Juneteenth 2020 marks the start of something very special, and we're excited for you to join us each week as we share our stories, tackle difficult topics, and ultimately learn a little bit more about each other. So now let's get started with the show. Welcome everyone to the very first episode of the Ashe Academy's Inspire, Uplift, Engage podcast. We are here today to discuss some difficult topics, specifically tokenism. So we're going to kind of define it, figure out how we all have been impacted by it. So let's get into our panel. First, I want to welcome Victoria Ayeni. Recent law school grad who will be a judicial law clerk in fall 2020. Then we have KJ Jones, editor-in-chief of Diesel Power Magazine, part of the Motor Trend Group. Then we have Fred Clavél, a postdoctoral research psychologist at San Diego State University, specializing in social psychology and quantitative methods. Then we have my sister, Natasha Ashe, Senior Assistant Community Asset Manager with the Property Management Company and the Ashe Academy's CFO. And then we have Crystal Jones, a Senior Product Development Project Management Spec for a major pharmaceutical company, and as you know, President of the Ashe Academy Board. Welcome, everyone.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello.
How is everyone doing?
Good. Happy to be here.
Okay, so you all have been called to discuss a very kind of interesting topic, tokenism. By the basis of you joining us, it has affected you in some way or other. This kind of falls into three categories and kind of has a gray area elsewhere. So being a token and a Black token in this respect in your community, academically or professionally. So does anyone want to take a stab at what the definition of tokenism actually is? There are no wrong answers, so go ahead and take a stab at it, and then I'll give the textbook definition.
It's in this discussion and context, and I guess in our society, it's considered a person who is accepted into a group based on in our space race uniqueness. You know, being Black, being included because bottom line, it's necessary. It's necessary for quota reaching. Have to have one in our society, otherwise you get called out because you don't.
Okay.
And in the case of Black women, it's often because we fill two roles. We need more women and we need a Black woman. So now we get a 2-for-1.
Okay. Anyone else? Just definition wise.
I think the main thing is just that it seems it's inclusion, but it's like very perfunctory, sort of surface level inclusion. It isn't really intended to be like long-term or meaningful necessarily, but more to kind of signal to others that, we're good.
Exactly. So like the textbook definition is a symbolic effort to do a particular thing, especially by recruiting a small number of people from underrepresented groups in order to give the appearance of sexual or racial equality within a workforce. So in that respect, everybody got it right, yes. So I want to kind of go around and see like what do you fall into against those three categories from within your community, academically. So this could be anywhere throughout like kindergarten through higher education, and then professionally anywhere in your career. Let's start with KJ.
Well, Sammy, for me, I think blatant, if you will, tokenism goes back to my early education. I went to a private school. It was, for all intents and purposes, an exclusively white school. And I was, I was accepted into the school purely based on athletic ability. It was a school that had a rich tradition, football history, championship teams, etc. And not for nothing, coach knew which players helped win games and helped win those championships. And my parents and family weren't really of the means to afford the tuition for that school. So I was given a scholarship to attend. That was myself and, for all intents and purposes, a few other, brothers that were there. So I think that for me was purely a token gesture because in one sense, I was helping the school and helping the athletic program by playing football, but the school then turns in and saying it's helping me, with education and actually with social lessons as well. But as far as being, the token, that certainly was where it started for me, because in many, for everything from birthday parties to, as you progress through school, high school parties, etc., being in a sense one of maybe 2 or 3 Black kids at, an all white deal.
Awesome. Anyone else academically the token? I know I can definitely say yes, certainly.
Sammy, you and I went to all the same like elementary, middle school, and high school. So yeah, definitely was one of very few, and in some years the only Black kids on the playground. And then in high school, definitely the same. I mean, we were talking about this the other day with our mom. We could count on our hands how many Black students were in the whole school, and we all knew each other. So maybe didn't hang out with them specifically, but we all knew each other for sure. And for college, for me, I definitely didn't feel like I was the only Black student there, just because I did make other Black friends, as Victoria is one of my college friends, but it wasn't like I was one of many, though. You're still low numbers. You kind of check off that check mark to say, we got you. So, yeah. And then professionally, I have only had one job post-college, and I guess it's 2 different titles that came about. I'm doing a horrible job of explaining this. I used to work for the association, and then we got taken over by a management company, and so I became one of their employees. Still, very few people were of color in the company, but when I was working for the association, I was the only Black employee. So.
I can also kind of build on that, since Tasha and I had the same college experience. Actually, starting from when I was younger, I also grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood and went to predominantly white public schools. And there were several other Black students, but by no means was that a majority for us there. And that in college, similar to how Tasha kind of described, it wasn't a predominantly white university, but it by no means had a majority or any large number of Black students either. I also was one of the only few Black women in my sorority, and then went on to law school and was one of 2 Black women in my graduating class. And that other woman ended up transferring to a different law school. So in my class, I was, to our knowledge, as far as people who, publicly identify as being Black women, was the only one who graduated in my class. So I think that version of tokenism has probably stuck with me the most in law school, a place where, you think there's going to be a difference there, but that, that profession's really behind the times in a lot of ways. If that makes sense.
Interesting. What about you, Fred? Where do you fall in?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. Although I guess kind of flipped in the opposite direction, in that like my elementary, middle school, high school experiences were actually really highly representative of Black and Latino people, particularly because I grew up in the Bronx. And once I got to college, it was just like a hard culture shock, because I suddenly, like, I was not surrounded by any brown faces like at all. or not nearly as many as I was accustomed to, and kind of even in my everyday interactions. And that was just like cold water to the face every day, you know, like not in a good way either, like not in a refreshing way, but more like whoa, this is a lot to process. And then kind of that experience, I got used to it in college, but it never really improved. Like throughout my experience in my master's, I think I was one of maybe 2 Black men in my master's program. And then during my PhD, my first year of my PhD, I was the only Black person in my entire department. That includes students and faculty. And there were not many others in the years that followed. So there's definitely sort of a thinning out of the ranks as I kind of went, you know, higher up into the echelon of academia. And yeah, it's definitely been kind of weird to navigate those waters, because I feel like I'm sometimes like the guy to go to for Black issues potentially, you know, and that's definitely not something that I'd like to be known for by default, you know, like I don't speak for my entire group of people necessarily. So it's definitely palpable like in the later years of my education, but the early years were actually a lot easier to navigate because of the more inclusive atmosphere.
And last but not least, Crystal, where do you fall in?
Well, interestingly, went to private school too. And so my experience was a little different in that when I started out in grade school, Lutheran school in Inglewood, and got to watch the browning of Inglewood, which is no other way to put this. So started out with being the minority, as it were, in my classrooms, but over the school years, and actually pretty quickly, watched my entire school brown out and the white students leave. Pretty much by the time I was in 6th grade, the last of the white students had left to either move out of the state or to other areas within the state, but pretty much browned up. And then that experience switched again when I got to high school. So I went to Lutheran High, which was in Burbank, but Lutheran Highs started out in Los Angeles. And so that neighborhood had changed because, again, browned out as more Black people moved in. And to quote my father, white flight happened and you saw white people leave these neighborhoods. And so Lutheran High had browned out as well. They still had white students there, but it was a pretty even mix. But the school moved to Burbank, which is a traditionally white neighborhood at the time that I started high school. And so I was bussed out there, and I remember my first experience of being called, and I'm not going to use the N-word because I need people to feel it the way it felt to me. But the first time I heard someone call me a nigger was when I was in Burbank. Welcome to the neighborhood, walking to Burbank High. And so my high school experience changed where there were more white students than I had gone to school with in prior years, and it did not brown out at all. In fact, it got whiter as I got closer to graduating from high school. And that's just simply because the San Fernando Valley was not known for having a large Black population, still isn't. And as the school, as I went through school and we got further and further away from our original Los Angeles roots, we got more white students and fewer Black students coming in from Los Angeles areas. So my experience changed by the time I got to high school. It's interesting, the class that was ahead of me, the class of 80, was an practically all Black class. It was 90% African American. And so they were sort of the last of the kids who came over from Los Angeles. I mean, except for my class. But we started to see the thinning of the Black kids coming from Los Angeles to Lutheran High. And so my experience changed. When I got to college, I went to UCLA the first year, and that, well, as you know, very few brown people there. But when I transferred to Dominguez Hills, I think I finally found home for myself, because Dominguez Hills, because of where it's located, was a very balanced school in terms of racial mixture. So I never felt like I was the only one there. What I found interesting was some of the white students that I went to school with had seemed to have never seen Black people until they got to Dominguez Hills, which I thought was interesting considering where Dominguez Hills was located.
Interesting. Well, I think that's a perfect segue into identity. So wherever you fall in the spectrum, how did it affect your identity? So you've taken on this, you maybe didn't volunteer, but you are the token. How do you kind of approach life being one, whether it's at work, in school, and how did it affect you? Anyone can speak up if.
For me, it really didn't affect me. I don't know. It wasn't overwhelmingly instilled by, my parents as far as identity. I think for myself, being from a neighborhood, and this is going again back to school, but being from a neighborhood that, was, I guess for all intents and purposes, Black, you know what I mean? And then going into that environment, I've carried my confidence with me into that environment. So it wasn't really a matter of, acclimation. There was more so adapting, to ways and manners and everything. But at the end of the day, you still had to return back to the block. So you couldn't lose yourself. That was impossible. You'd end up in a bad way if you, in a sense, came back to the block as a white guy. You feel me? So it was really a matter of being able to adapt and play, I say it this way, play both sides of a very, very unique fence in order to survive, and then in order to grow, because I have to look back at that experience that I got in elementary school and high school at the private school, because for all intents and purposes, it's played a big part in my growth and my development and my success professionally. So, there's no way I can poo-poo it. While I didn't have the best time there, and Crystal knows that, and people that, know me, I didn't like it, but, there was endurance, and then there was survival, and it has helped me quite a bit. So what I'm getting at is, though, it's just really a matter of moving confidently, and that's something that I've done since day one.
So.
I want to chime in speaking about confidence. So for my experience, I'd say I went on kind of a roller coaster of emotions. As a kid, I kind of wanted to deny the fact that we were Black, especially because we were what we felt like the only ones there. So noticing you're like being different was very apparent. So I remember being called like, you're the whitest Black girl that I know. And I always had like a internal feeling of like, I don't like the way that sounds. That does not sound good. I'm not ashamed about being Black, but you're kind of making me feel like there's something wrong with being Black. So as I've gotten older, I've started to learn how to embrace the things that I guess outsiders have told me something's wrong with you. My hair, my nose, my skin complexion, and then, it's the backhanded compliments. Your skin's so dark, but you don't get a sunburn, so I'm kind of jealous, but like, I don't want to be that dark because that would mean that I'm Black. But like, you dance so well, but like, you've got curves, this, like, there's all of these comments that are intended to be nice, but they're still not coming from talking about Blackness as being good. Circling back to being the like token, though, I've learned to use it as a benefit, and I agree with Fred that I don't want to be the person that's speaking entirely for the Black community, but for those that don't have enough exposure to Black individuals, I am proud to be like, no, this is wrong. And if you have further questions, you can certainly ask me, but you should start educating yourself. And especially with the last month that's been going on, I had some friends come and talk to me and be like, can you tell me where I should donate or what I should read or this. And then after like about a week, they came back and were like, I am so sorry that I did that to you. I realized that was my like job to do that research and not for you to explain all of the injustices that have been experienced by your community done by my community. Maybe I didn't do it necessarily, but like I realized that was not right. So anyway, I mean, it's been a roller coaster for sure. There's things that I've had to unlearn about myself and love, and then things that I'm proud that I stuck with that and, you know, said what I said. But that's been my experience.
Awesome.
And I was going to say,
it is a journey too.
Absolutely. We're
to
not
pick up
done.
on to pick up on something Tasha said, one of the things that I've always hated is having people, white people, tell me, you don't sound Black. And I have to remind them on a regular, and I've been saying this since forever, this new climate wasn't anything new for me. I've been unapologetically Black my entire life because my father made sure I was unapologetically Black my entire life. But I used to hate it when they would say, oh, well, you don't sound Black. And I would have to tell them, well, I hate to break this to you, but white people don't have the market cornered on good English. And this good English comes from my good mother, who was also Black, in case you're confused.
Anyone else want to speak to identity, how being a token has impacted them?
Hard to follow that. I do agree with what everyone has said, though, about not wanting to speak on behalf of all Black people, because we are not a monolith. I know that my experience can't inform the experience of every Black person, but that I've definitely been put in that position a lot, especially because of the schools I've gone to, and particularly with law school recently, being that there were so few of us there. But kind of like to Tasha's point, I think that in some circumstances, for all of my white friends that have barely any friends of color, let alone Black friends, I think in some instances it can be of a benefit to be able to use that position in some instances. But for most of the time, you know, for those of us that are being tokenized in that position, that's a benefit for those white friends, but it's a burden for us. And I think that most of the time, you know, even though we can find the silver lining in being tokenized, again, it's another burden that we have to bear. And for me, having, you know, I have a white mother, my father was an African immigrant. So I feel like I don't have a lot to inform my white friends on about the Black community in every circumstance. So I feel as if sometimes, you know, being tokenized, and rightfully so, you know, I should be constantly, you know, branching out into the Black community and learning more about that culture. But it does mean that instead of my white friends and peers doing that work, that's again something that we have to do in order to teach them.
I think that's amazing, and it's also important for us to kind of reflect on kind of deeper its impact on our kind of identity as Black people. Like, how does it make you feel if you are the only one, like how Black you are? Have you ever been kind of challenged on your Blackness in that respect because you're the token, but you don't live up to what their expectations of a Black person is?
Well, interestingly, in my own neighborhood, because I grew up in a predominantly, and again, I saw the white flight and the browning of my own neighborhood. So when we moved in, right before I started kindergarten, we still had white neighbors. And then the neighborhood itself browned as white flight took place and white people left the neighborhood. And, you know, my peers around the neighborhood were, you know, the most harsh and most critical. Because again, you don't sound Black. So this didn't just come from white people. It came from a lot of white people. It came from Black people too. You know, this expectation that, you know, I wasn't Black enough. And I'm like, oh, I don't know how much Blacker you think I need to be, but I promise you, if I walked into a Klan meeting, they're going to remind me how Black I am. Doesn't matter how I'm talking.
Right. Yeah, I have the same experience. We've had comments from very close family members, extended family members, and then, you know, outside friends that have made comments, and then also other white friends that have been like, I'm more Black than you because I know about this, this, and this. hold it right there, honey. You do not get to explain my experience of being a Black person just because I don't talk ghetto, I don't act ghetto, I don't do this, this, and this, and this. So yeah, I've struggled with that a lot because people have challenged my Blackness, and I'm like, if I don't talk and you just see me, all you see is me being Black. If other communities, they don't have to say anything or do anything and they can blend in, I don't get afforded that same opportunity. So don't talk to me about what Blackness is.
But this idea that in order to be Black, you have to sound ghetto. And
Right.
Unfortunately, that's an idea that's not just carried forth by the white community, it's carried forth by our own community. And we need to stop doing that to ourselves.
Agreed.
And treating us like we are one thing, that if you don't have an Angela Davis afro and you talk like this and roll your head, that you are not Black. That is not, I can be that if I need to be, I can. And sometimes you do need to be that way. But it's not all y'all know, sometimes you got to go there. It's like, hold on, let me put on my Black lipstick so you can remember. But you don't have to always be that. And the idea that we are only one thing is maddening, coming from both the Black community and the white community. But I think it really angers me when it comes from the white community, because you see me based on language, and that's not cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think just on that language tip, while that is our dialect, if you will, I think it's a matter of a really weird kind of homage to heritage, with our roots being primarily from the South, and our ancestors and the way that they spoke. That's what we had as far as communication. And as time evolved, that communication has become slang, has become this, has become that. It didn't start, if you will, in like the ghettos of, say, the 60s or anything like that. This is communication that has evolved over many, many years. And it is, if you will, ours. So if I'm talking to Sammy, or right here in my own house talking to my wife, sure, we'll throw all kind of, ebonics, if you will, around the room. You know what I'm saying? But it's not a matter of it being, we're not intelligent, we're not cultured, we're not diverse, and et cetera. So I think that's just a communication thing. And when, white people hear it, or when they quote unquote try to use it, I think it's a matter of us just becoming inherently protective of it, because it is our language, it's our dialect.
And it's not a good look on you.
Let's talk more about culture then. So one of the survival mechanisms previously mentioned, code switching, or alluded to. So now we're talking about it. Code switching. How many people practice outwardly code switching? You're in different spaces and you speak differently.
I didn't know that was the term.
Yeah, I pretty much have done that for the better part of the past 2 decades.
I'd say my entire career. My entire career. But I mean, that's just a matter of my home training. My mother wouldn't let me go out in the street talking Ebonics, and so you don't go into the workplace speaking Ebonics, you just learn it. And then and KJ and I are older than you guys, so we've been doing this for 30 years. And it didn't have a name called code switching. It was called keeping a job. It was called getting a job and keeping a job. And so you don't go in there, being Shaniqua, because Shaniqua don't get no jobs.
Tell him, Susie Cream Cheese, tell him.
Yeah, his name for me when he sees me talking on the phone for business is Christy. So,
But as I mentioned, these are survival techniques or mechanisms. So have you guys over the years used it more so, or have you kind of gone back on your filter between those changes? Because they can either be harsh or they could be, gradual. I'm slowly going back into my professional voice. Or
I think for me, though, it is dependent on who my colleagues were and where I was working. So, for example, I've worked a number of years in the music and entertainment industry. And so there, it's you know, even though it's still very not as integrated as it should be, except when you look at the artists, but behind the scenes, the people working in those companies aren't as integrated as one might get the impression. Just because you see an outward artist being Black doesn't mean that all the people behind them are. They're generally not. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a little more lax and loose. It was in that industry. And that is because a lot of things were lax and loose. When I went to interview at Rido, I have one tattoo, just one. And I remember stressing out when I went into this interview with them about how I was going to cover up this tattoo. And so I covered up this tattoo because I wanted to give this impression when I walked into this office. And I walked in, and the receptionist, Jenny's tatted up. Jenny's got piercings everywhere and blue hair. And I'm like, and I stressed out over one tattoo. But the thing is, even if I hadn't, the tattoo would have been a problem because of this brown skin. So I still had to worry about this tattoo because it would have given an impression that I wasn't trying to give off. My one tattoo tells you absolutely nothing about me except I have one tattoo. Doesn't tell you anything else about me. So, you know, I think it depends on where I've worked. Some places were a lot more vanilla than others, and so the code switching is a lot harder there. You know, you lean into it more, but some companies you don't. And it kind of depends on my colleagues too. You know, where I'm working at right now, if I'm in a safe space at lunch, I've got a lunch crew. And my lunch crew is like some of the coolest white people I have worked with, except in the entertainment industry. And so I am free to be unapologetically Black around them without any worries that, you know, they're going to look at me in a different way. But they'll know that they'll see me go from lunch to a meeting and I'm going to be Christy again. So it kind of depends.
Okay, so on the younger spectrum, do you guys practice code switching techniques?
Not as much as I used to, I would say. Like, I think like my sort of intro to very like predominantly white settings, which was in undergrad, I was much more inclined to do it then. And then kind of as I spent more time in very white spaces, I got a little bit more comfortable in my own skin in a way, and began to assert it a little bit more effectively, I think. So I'm like, at this point now, I'm not as inclined to sort of tone down my Blackness around, you know, my white friends or colleagues or anything like that, because I don't feel like it would be a threat. It shouldn't be a threat. It shouldn't be a problem or an issue. And, you know, if it is, I'm happy to discuss that with anyone who might feel that way and, you know, try and figure out where those feelings are coming from for them, because that's definitely not something that's a problem for me, but more for somebody who might take issue with something that I say or do, or like the way I dress or something like that. So it's, yeah, I've kind of...
You're giving people a lot of grace if you're willing to discuss it. I'm not sure I want to discuss it.
It's tough, yeah. I think I've tried to be more diplomatic.
Tactfully discuss it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a tough line to walk, because I'm sure like people have expectations about how you're going to approach those discussions anyway. Yep. As a Black person, like, oh, you're going to yell at me, or you're going to like go off on me or something like that. And it's like, I'm a human being.
I think the one place where I have changed, and I don't like the term code switching. It's just been, you know, how I get down. But I think the one thing that has definitely changed for me and how I move in corporate spaces is I am no longer doing my hair based on what you think it should be. This is what my hair came out of my head. This is what God blessed me with, and this is how we gonna get down. And ask all the questions you want. Do not touch my hair. That's a no.
Oh man.
Do not touch my hair. Do not ask to touch my hair. Do not feel some kind of way when I tell you no, you can't touch my hair, because
everyone got triggered off of that comment.
Used to have dreadlocks, because so I won't
tell you what I've told some people, but I will put it this way, because Sammy has heard what I've actually said.
No, we don't need to hear that.
But I have asked people that you can touch my hair when I can touch something else that you probably don't want me to touch. And that usually ends the hair touching discussions.
I think this is a perfect segue into microaggressions. This is a little bit of a controversial topic. So does anyone want to take a stab at the definition of microaggressions?
You don't sound like a Black person.
That's an example
That's an
of,
example.
but what is the definition?
Like something that is like a comment or conduct that unintentionally oppresses a member of a marginalized group, and very commonly the Black community. And my first example, based on what we were just talking about with hair touching, but one that I would always get, as you know, they're going to reach for the hair, feeling it, and then being like, wow, it's so much softer than I was expecting it would be.
Girl, they got to your hair? Because that wouldn't have happened.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. That's the thing. I think because I was mentioning earlier, I grew up and was surrounded in almost exclusively white spaces. I before, it took until I got much older to realize that that wasn't okay, because I was used to everyone doing it. I was like, okay, I guess this is a normal thing,
Oh no,
but
you can't pet me like a cat.
Right, exactly. And then, like, kind of how Tasha was mentioning earlier, it's almost a backhanded compliment, but worse, because there are racial undertones.
Yep, you're pretty for a Black girl.
Mm-hmm.
That number one, like, how am I supposed to take that as a compliment?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm saying that you're pretty, yeah, but you didn't need to put in that you're for a Black girl.
Because I'm just pretty, period.
Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous, but
Yeah.
But my favorites, and the women will relate to this, is, being asked. I remember going to summer camp, and this was a Lutheran summer camp. And so it was all white, except for me and my sister. We were literally the only Black children at this entire summer camp. And Sherry Niece, if you're still out there and you see this, shout out to you, girl. Because Sherry Niece did not.
I was like,
shout out.
Shout out to Sherry Niece, because Sherry Niece let everybody at that camp know that if they touched me or my sister, they were going to have to deal with her. And Sherry was nobody to play with. But she let everybody know at that camp not to mess with me and my sister. So if she is out there, shout out to you, Sherry Niece. You're the only reason why summer camp wasn't an unpleasant experience for me. But I remember girls asking me, so how do you comb your hair? And I was like, with a comb, what do you use? Really?
Yeah.
It's a dumb question. That's like, all microaggressions are always around the color of your skin, your hair, just things.
So well spoken.
Yes. The way you talk, the way you walk, the way you act. It's like, you guys just don't know that this is an insult.
Yeah.
This is not a compliment in any way, shape, or form at all.
So these are great examples. How do you guys address microaggressions as they come swinging your way?
Well, it's for me personally, I guess honestly, it seems like it's been a long time since a microaggression has come my way. I think that in the last, say, 10 years, professionally, maybe even longer than 10 years, probably longer than 10 years, but I'm Sammy, you know me, I'm pretty direct, blunt, and 100 at all times, you know what I mean? And I don't know if I exude something and people kind of perceive that, or maybe some people have, in a sense, experienced whatever wrath that is and pass it on to the next person or whatever. But microaggressions really don't come my way to say, I experience them on any kind of a regular basis. People just kind of don't mess with KJ and everything will be all right,
I think there might be an interesting caveat to this kind of microaggression. I would argue that there can be some nonverbal instances of this, and especially facial expressions when they meet you, when they see a picture of you. Just my voice might sound differently than what you imagine my face to be. And
Well,
when you
we've all
first see
experienced that.
Sammy's
Yeah.
face, you might not think that face and that voice should match, but they do.
We've all
They
walked into interviews where you've been on the phone with that person. You walk in and even though they haven't said it, that they're looking at you thinking, oh crap, she's black.
Oh, for sure.
That's a microaggression.
I don't see
Oh,
I don't see that as aggressive. I just see that as stupid,
Stupid.
Well, but it's micro. It's on a small
It's not
scale.
an aggression to me, regardless. You coming for me, coming at me is an aggression. You know what I mean? And I don't see someone, oh, I thought you were taller. That's not aggressive. That's stupid.
Maybe we should go through the definition so we can get that clear. So a brief and common daily verbal, behavioral, and environmental communications, whether intentional or unintentional, that transmit hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to a target person because they are Black or, in other cases, belong to other groups of color. So
would that include my coworker dropping Ebony and Jet magazines off at my desk?
Yes.
Yes.
No way. Oh, man.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, but did you read it? But did you read it?
When I first
Oh
started
my
working,
gosh.
and I'm just going to shout them out. When I first started working at Rhino Records, and let me be clear, Rhino was not that kind of place, but we had one or two folk. And this woman dropped off, when I first started working there, dropped off Jet and Ebony magazines at my desk. And I didn't know where they were coming from. I come back to my desk and they were there. And I'm like, where are these coming from? And I ran into her as she was dropping off at my desk. And I asked her, I was like, and so why are you dropping? She goes, well, I get these for free. And I was like, so why don't you read them?
Wow.
You might learn something like not dropping off Jet and Ebony magazines at my desk, because I'm pretty sure there's an article in there that covers what you're doing right now.
Oh,
so as the token, of course, we have white friends. We're not going to discriminate in that way, especially if you grew up around multiple different cultures of people. Have you had to deal with people overcompensating? So in that respect, they would think that they're meaning well, sending, oh, here's Jet. You're like, I don't care for that publication. But have you noticed people kind of overcompensating in that respect, where they're just trying to help, just trying to do, but it's actually more exhaustive on your behalf?
Well, I've been working for over 30 years, so I've got lots of stories like that. You guys don't have time for all of them. But I will tell you, one of my early jobs, when I worked at McDonald's when I was a teenager, I was 19, and this chick named, and yeah, I'm shouting people out because I hope you're watching, Rhoda. So Rhoda was one of the managers at because she doesn't get a pass on this. She really doesn't. So I get to shout her out. And if I remember her last name, I'd shout that out too. But Rhoda, you remember me in Sacramento when you decided that you were going to come up to me every single day and tell me Black jokes because you thought you needed to make me feel more comfortable for being Black at work? I was very comfortable being Black at work. Apparently you weren't. But every day, until I finally went to the manager and I told him, I was like, listen, you're going to need to tell her to stop or I'm going to clock out and I'm going to make her stop. And you're really not going to like the way I'm going to do that.
I think that an example of overcompensation that I can think of, last year I wrote a paper, not a published paper by any means, but a very interesting research paper about how academic freedom is perpetuating systemic racism in higher education. And a big focus of that, and a big focus of the conversations that are happening about this in law schools in particular and other graduate schools, are when you have only a handful of Black students or students of color in a class, and a professor relies on that student to relay that experience for that race, for the entire race. Or let's talk about this case and how this Black man got shot running away. Hey, Victoria, can you talk about that? So I think that didn't actually happen to me. That is an example, but it does happen to students all over the country in higher education. And it seems to me that oftentimes educators think that they're doing a service by, oh, well, I'm not going to speak on behalf of this race. Let me have this one student do it because it'll be more accurate, as if they're doing something good and overcompensating in that way, but it ends up being more harmful and not an educational experience for that student either.
Not at all.
Exactly. I definitely remember.
And it shows that they didn't do their homework.
Right.
You're going to bring this case up and you're going to talk about it, then be prepared to talk about it. But acting like I'm some expert because I share the same skin tone as any of the characters in this case, that says you didn't do your homework. That speaks more to me about your ability to be a teacher and an educator than anything else.
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember in high school, we were learning about the civil rights movement because that's just my specialty. Everyone wanted to, partner up with me because, yeah, I know everything about that whole era. I was just like, guys, like, first of all, you got the wrong one because I'm learning it with you. So, and then another from that same academic year, this is junior year, I remember Huckleberry Finn being read. And I look back at that time, like I feel as though if I were a teacher, just imagining if I weren't Black, I would say, okay, this year we're not going to read this because we have a Black student in this class that does not need to hear the N-word read 500 billion times that it's in this book. I was just like looking back and just thoroughly confused as to why this was chosen to be read. The lesson learned, I missed that one because I don't know exactly. I don't know if you guys have read or remember that.
I have managed to avoid Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah, I didn't read that. I remember To Kill a Mockingbird, and I was just like, why though?
Yeah, it's kind of alarming, the number of so-called classics that just use the word nigger with reckless abandon.
Exactly.
That's one of them for sure, and it gets taught to lots of people. It's one that I came across in my education too, and it's deeply uncomfortable because there's like nothing even remotely instructive about reading this.
Not at all.
It's like,
not at all. Like,
yeah, I don't remember the reason.
Add it on your academic resume, man.
As soon as you said Huckleberry Finn, I'm like, oh.
I saw you cover your face. You're like, oh,
that was crazy.
It's egregious.
Fred.
Yeah.
But even before then, I do remember, I want to say, and I'm going like straight to grades, third grade. And I feel like this is the first time racial issues were introduced. So whether that's talking about Martin Luther King Jr. Day, just mentioning it, or reading some random book. But I feel like that was the first time I knew for sure that I was different. Because as soon as we started reading this Black book, everyone was looking at me. So it's kind of like with tokenism, it's one thing to be the only one, but to be reminded that you were the only one at every waking moment, that's the difficult part, and that's what you have to deal with. So even before
I had
then,
the same experience, but it was fourth grade for me. I specifically remember because I loved that teacher, and I remember I was walking in the front of the class. We were going probably to lunch or something, and she put her arm around my shoulder, and she's like, "Wow, I'm so proud of you. Like, this is such a difficult like topic that we're talking about. Like, you're like, are you okay?" And I'm like, why was I supposed to not be okay? We're all learning about this, whatever topic it was. But that was a memory that I will not ever forget, of noticing I am different. Everybody knows that I'm different, and I'm the one that's being affected by this topic, when really all of us should be going through the same experience of learning about something that's sad and tragic. I don't know if it was slavery related or something, but it was something that was apparently triggering for her to comment that I was supposed to be triggered.
But on the flip side of that, I was going to say, so, most of us went through school and had, if you had any Black teachers, you might have had one. I didn't really see Black teachers until I got to college, but I had one, Mr. Hill. He was our, and because my maiden name was Hill, everyone just assumed because he was Black and I was Black that we were related, like no relation whatsoever. But what was interesting was, as our school browned out, Terry Camberg, who was our principal, before the term woke was a thing, he was probably the wokest white man I had met. And the fact that he felt it was his responsibility educating a classroom full of primarily African-American children, he felt it was his job to make sure that we learned about Black history, and not just during Black History Month. And so shout out to Terry Camberg. He is in heaven now, but he really went out of his way to make sure that his Black students did not hear about Black history for the first time when we got to high school, or did not hear about Black history in the context of just slavery. He made it a point of learning about who we were and our history. And so I appreciated that. He was, in contrast to Victoria's teachers, if you're going to teach Black subjects, don't put the onus on your students. You be the teacher. If you're going to teach this topic, teach it. And so I appreciated the fact that this man recognized that he had primarily a 90% Black students in his class, and felt it was his job to teach us about Black history, and more importantly, to teach the white students in our class Black history as well. So it wasn't the first time they heard about it was high school, and they heard about slavery and Martin Luther King and Harriet Tubman, and okay, that's it.
Check
So
mark.
how many people had Black teachers prior to college?
I had a few.
I
Not a
won.
lot, but a few. Yeah.
I had one for sure. I don't know if there was anyone.
I might
I
have
had
had
one,
a sub.
none in high school. Oh, I'm sorry, you said sub. We had one sub.
Oh yeah, I don't know.
In high
You know
school.
the name. Yeah, I don't know about the subs, but I
Oh,
definitely.
no, we knew Mr. Strickland because we harassed him. He was a frequent sub, so we frequently harassed him. I don't know why he kept coming back. We were not nice to him.
Okay, so for the people who did have Black teachers, how did that impact your educational journey? Whether positively, negatively?
Well, for me, that's a loaded question because, so Paul Hill, while I was in school, was a fantastic teacher. And he incorporated, because he was a musician, he incorporated music in his class. For me, it's a loaded mixed bag, because I found out things about Paul Hill much later, not good things, that I've struggled because they've tainted some of my memories of him, because some of the things we discovered about him weren't good things. And so, it was up until, but fortunately, I didn't find out about those things until after I was an adult. So it's impacted my adult memories of him, but certainly it was an impact on my childhood. It was a good thing, because I had this one really hip Black teacher, because Paul Hill wore, because I was, KJ and I are born in the 60s, so we're children of the 70s and 80s. So, Paul Hill was hip as hell. He wore, bell-bottom pants and platform shoes, and he had an afro out to here. He looked like he came off the cover of an album cover. And he was a musician on top of it. Yeah, he was. Shout out to him. But, he incorporated music, and not just that, he incorporated hip music into our. Al Green was part of our teachings. Let's put it that way.
They all just said, "Who's Al Green, honey?"
No, we
No.
know.
Oh, I know Al Green.
Come on now.
No, Al Green, Earth, Wind, and Fire, that was all incorporated in our teachings. And, I appreciated that, because he was the hippest man I knew. And, he was unapologetically Black, and he took a lot of flack for being in a very, at the time he got there, white school, and the only African-American on staff, for being as unapologetically Black. And he wore a dashiki to school every now and then. So shout out to Paul Hill.
I'm gonna revert back. I didn't raise my hand because I didn't have a Black teacher, but I am remembering at my school there was one, and thinking about what we're discussing here, he was a token.
Okay, so I want you to hold that thought, because I have a very interesting thing to discuss about that. So any other Black teachers that positively or negatively, and then we will get into that.
I honestly don't remember any Black teachers, and that can't be right.
Oh,
But
it could be.
It could be.
I didn't have
Sadly.
I only had them in undergrad. Absolutely. And that's because I went to City College. The only diverse educational era of my life was undergrad.
And I didn't have any until I got to Dominguez Hills. I didn't have any Black professors either.
I know I had a sub that was Black, but yeah, I definitely did not have any permanent teachers that were Black.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. I did have one in high school, but it was, unfortunately for him, I was not good at geometry. It wasn't going to work out. You weren't going to take it wasn't going to be warm because it's just not a good class for me. But but yeah, after then, and that was freshman year, so that was the last time I had.
Had Mr. Park, who went to college with mom and dad and remembered mom from working in the cafeteria.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so let's talk about when a token meets a token. So, very interesting situation. If you are the token Black kid in your school and you're meeting that teacher, or if you're at work, you are the token Black person, and you are now expanding the tokens into, it's not just one anymore, we have another one. So can anyone speak to the day they met another token, or what would be the former only one?
I feel like that low-key happened with me and Victoria.
Talk about it.
I was like, I feel like it was Tasha.
I mean, okay, so Victoria was in the same sorority as my roommate, Amy. And so we got introduced freshman year, and we were both like, hey. And she's like, yeah, you guys can be friends. We're like, yeah. But I don't remember really like us talking so much about our lived experience. Being tokens specific. Obviously, we weren't using that terminology, but recognizing that we were until probably post-college, where we were having more, like, we recently actually were talking about microaggressions. What was that, within the last like week or something? But I have another example of another college friend who played Ultimate Frisbee with me, and I should have brought that up earlier. We were the only two Black people on the team, and what was annoying for us is that everybody would get our names, and we had nicknames on the team. They'd get our names mixed up because they're like, oh, well, I mean, you're both fast, you're Black, like, sorry, I can't really tell you guys apart. I'm like, you can definitely tell us apart. We're different heights, different body shapes, different complexions, but you just see us as being
one Black person.
Ultimate lazy right there.
Yes, but so we, like, freshman year, I bonded with her tremendously. We're still friends, of course, but we definitely were like, oh, you grew up in a white area. She grew up in Irvine. You grew up in a white area, you went to white schools, you have been called out for being a white Black girl, you have all of the same like experiences, so it made us become very much instant friends. And we would constantly be like, you're not talking about the right person, you didn't have that conversation with me, you need to talk to, like, I'm not no longer addressing you until you can get my name correct. So we both like kind of defended each other in that way, and that made it a lot better. But yeah.
Let me, this is something that's a great question. And there's a bunch of different ways it can be addressed. I'll start with teenage years. And I was part of a program. This was a summer program that I was shipped off to, basically. It was held in upstate New York. Roughly, my parents took me to Port Authority, and I rode on a Greyhound bus for almost 13 hours to the edge of Canada, basically, and way upstate New York to a program at Potsdam. It's Potsdam College or University, but it's just upstate. And it was a program for students who are interested in engineering to spend a 2-week session, if you will, at college, where you lived in a dorm and you went to classes, and it kind of presented what engineering school would be like if you were to go farther after you graduated from high school. This was, for all intents and purposes, an all-white program. I think Potsdam College probably was an all-white college, or predominantly white college. However, I was sent to this deal because in my community, at the community center, I guess they reached out to people at the community center, and we know that there's a need for Black engineers, et cetera, et cetera. KJ can come for free. And any other, let's just say, minority child from any other neighborhood can come for free. So anyway, you get up there and it's like, okay, I'm really far away from home right now. And this is really wider than I've ever been around, even given high school. But I was in my room, just kind of getting used to this dorm thing and seeing what's going on. And I had a white roommate, and in the corner of my eye, when my door was open, I saw this black face walk down the hallway. And I literally shot out of my room to chase this guy. To, you know, hey, like, I'm here and you're here, and et cetera. Let's make this work. What I'm going on to say is, it's one of my dearest friends. He's been one of my friends and brothers since 1980 to this day. So that's one instance of when you see another token. In that case, yes, you know, they needed the minority numbers there. You come for free, so that's tokenism, no doubt about it. Mm-hmm. Now, forward to professionally, and things are different. I'm in a space now where I'm pretty much the only Black that does my job. I'm the editor of a major magazine, a major publication that's owned by, you know, a major media company. And I lead that, and I'm afforded opportunities to go to different press events, drive trucks, drive cars, etc. And in the automotive media, there are not a lot of minorities. We just had a panel about that last week with the Motor Press Guild. It was very, very impactful. But anyway, you know, I go to these things all over the country, and most times, it's myself and maybe another brother or another, not really a sister, but another brother, or maybe even two. It's a stretch for two, but in most cases one, or a Latina or Latino. Sandra Munoz is one of my friends, and she'll be at drives, etc. Now in the professional space, you know, it's not like 1980 when I ran down the hall to chase Russell. And in the professional space, you have to figure out, it's almost like non-verbally sizing someone up. You know, do you extend a handshake, or, you know, like the Key and Peele skit, you know, do you start dapping up and hugging up and all that kind of thing, you know? And it can go both ways. While you might have the energy to meet this person and you know, extend some sort of brotherhood or sisterhood, you know, there's been instances where they're on the fallback, and it's like, you know, in your mentals, what the fuck is your problem, man? You know what I mean? What's wrong with you? We're clearly the two people in this environment, you know, we should acknowledge in some way. Mm-hmm. However, you have to be cautious with your acknowledgement because of perception. Oh, they're congregating now. Uh-oh, you know, they're starting to unify. We better, you know, you have to be cognizant of who's watching you and what's watching you and what that thought might be. So that's a really wild dynamic. And while I'm at these things, I say this with a really high amount of certainty here. While I go to these things as the only Black man, I'm there really based on merit more than, oh, we need to bring KJ here because he's a Black guy. You know, KJ is the only guy that's doing what he does, you know, period, point blank. And I'm in a spot where, you know, you move me out, you just move another person in. It's not a spot where there can be 2 or 3 or 4 of me in my position. So, you know, of course, I'm going to do what I need to do professionally to maintain my spot. There's no question about it, because there's no certainty that once I'm gone, they're going to roll another person like me in. You follow what I'm saying? So it's preservation, because I honestly carry, and again, that's the confidence, I carry everything on my back. Everybody rides with me until this whole space and this movement now gets greater and greater, so that there can be more Black editors of major automotive magazines. I'm not saying there's no Black editors of magazines. That's not true. But, you know, your Ebony, your Jet, your Black Enterprise, you know what I mean? Your Essence. To be the top of the masthead on something that focuses on, you know, that has a largely white demographic as far as its client, as far as its buyer, its advertiser, You know, this is landmark. So when I come across others in our professional space, you know, it can range. It can range from, hey, how you doing, to hey, what's up, baby, you know, and going back to our dialect, etc. It really does.
It's definitely a code switch.
It really does.
Just so
It
you
does
know,
range.
you have it in you. I'm proud of you.
Well, listen, it's not necessarily. I don't look at that as a code switch. I get what the term is, and I get, you know, that's what it says. But as far as a coat switch, I think more so it's just a matter of wearing a coat that's just split down the middle. You have this side and that side, but you're wearing one coat.
I can definitely say I've had situations, obviously growing up, was it kindergarten through high school, we were one of very few Black people in the community. So every now and then there would be Black people. I did befriend people early on, but then they ended up moving away. So then I'm left one of the only ones again. But then once I got into college, there wasn't really like I accidentally went to a very diverse school. Let's just put that out there. I just wanted to go to New York. I just picked City College. I got in. Okay, most diverse. And when I say diverse, I mean melting pot of every type of person was at that school, accidentally. So I didn't set out for that. And then my friends just happened to be of every single walk of life, every type of Black person. So people from Haiti, Dominican people, if you want to rep your Blackness today. So yeah, hey, I'm calling people out today. So no, I kind of fell into a very diverse set of friends who I'm very close with still to this day, even moving back to California. But it's funny, the most like longingness to be like close with Black people has happened professionally, where I'm once again the token, but every now and then there's one person on the floor that is also Black. And I'm like, okay, play it cool. Do not, don't try to dap up. Don't try to call attention to yourself, because come to find out they're a very reserved person, and that would not work for them. It actually took about a year before she actually started speaking to me. And that ended up being like an hour-long conversation in the break room. so we're good now. But like, you don't know, if you are kind of holding court as the token, you don't know how to really work with other people who you never know if they are used to being a token too. So are they going to judge you on your, I guess, exhibition of Blackness too? So it's difficult navigating amongst our own people, being a token, from my perspective, I would say.
And I think that's because we've been scarred to be less Black in spaces where we're not the majority, and that's too bad that we've been pushed to don't be as Black. And I think, you know, for me, that wasn't always the case, because like I said, my father pushed us to be unapologetically Black. So I never tried to be, despite what people heard coming out of my mouth and their perception of what I sounded like, I made no bones about that. I am Black, and I'm not trying to be anything else but Black. How I talk has nothing to do with that.
Awesome. Anyone else with similar stories of meeting other people who are tokens?
One at Warner Music Group. Yeah, I'm calling out companies.
And names too. Don't leave that out. First and last, socials.
Yep. Go find these people. But Fred was the head of communications there. And so I don't know, maybe I misread him. Maybe if Fred will see this, he'll clear this up with me. But I always felt like he was trying to separate himself from other Black employees, as if, somehow acknowledging or, speaking to or, associating with was somehow going to dilute him. And I always felt some kind of way about it. And I just decided after the first time I met Fred, I'm good on you. If you want to be that way, that's cool. I don't know anything about you. You certainly don't know anything about me, but you seem to have rejected me. And I don't know if it's solely on my skin tone or what, but it felt that way. And it's too bad when you feel like your own people aren't accepting and acknowledging of you, especially when you are only one of a few in this largely white work environment. Because I think I speak for all of us. KJ and I have been working, for 30 plus years, and I have always been only one of a few. I mean, some companies were better than others, but I've always been one of the few, or an only. I've worked at companies where I was the only Black person there. I've worked at companies where I was only one of three. Or I've worked in, I might be able to count on two hands the number of Black people there. And some companies have been better than others. But it's always disheartening to meet the others, and they don't seem to be as welcoming of you.
I mean, we also have to be okay. I'm not saying your experience was that way. Not everybody's going to be your friend. So don't take it to heart if some people. No, I'm not saying that was you,
it's
but
not
in
a matter of being
general,
out there to
yeah,
make a friend. It's,
yeah. So
just acknowledgement.
Yeah.
It's not about being friends. It's acknowledgement. It's what he said. It's just acknowledgement, sheer acknowledgement that, like when KJ and I were in Europe last year, and we were walking through a town and we saw the only two other Black people we saw, we did the what's up nod. Because, it's always good to acknowledge your own. Yep. It's just the acknowledgement more so than anything. You don't have to be my friend. We ain't got to do lunch together. You ain't got to be coming to my house. I don't have to come to yours. But
okay, I'll amend what I said. Be okay with maybe they don't have the tools to acknowledge you the way that you want to be acknowledged.
And
I have definitely, especially growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood, the nod, dap in general. Let's go there. That's not something that I grew up with doing. So even when our uncles would visit and they're like, "Come on, it's time to dap. I'm leaving," and I was like, I don't do that. It's like I don't. And even but these are cultural differences between people who grow up in neighborhoods where we are the only Black family and we're not dapping each other in the household.
Well, yeah, I tried to do that too,
but no, like I didn't grow up that way. I don't grow up greeting Black people that way. So just being open to different Black experiences. The last thing I do want to ask is, has anyone ever challenged your merit based upon you being the only one in these spaces? So kind of the affirmative action, or you were you weren't picked anything other than you were Black. Had nothing to do, you didn't get these degrees or anything.
Just the other day had this conversation with a friend of mine who is talking about how things are changing, in light of George Floyd's death, and how we've got these marches that have been going on ever since his death. And, basically said, well, it looks like we're going to go back to affirmative action. I was like, and who said that affirmative action was doing anything for us anyway? I was like, how do you know? He goes, well, a friend of mine, friend of yours, went to college and he's feeling some kind of way because some Black student got in. I was like, did he get a letter from the college saying, yo, we let this brother in, we had to kick your ass to the curb, so therefore you're not getting in? Did the Black person get a letter saying, yeah, we kicked this white boy to the curb so you can get in? Truth of the matter is, you guys don't know whether affirmative action is doing that. And it's an insult to me and everybody on this panel to tell me that I didn't earn my way into the spaces I have been in. It is an insult. And for you to assume that affirmative action got me anything, if it did, nobody told me. Nobody sent me a letter saying I booted you. I picked you over the white person. Nobody has ever told me that. So I believe that I've earned every place that I have been in my career, in my education, wherever spaces I've moved in. I believe my husband has done the same thing. I know all of you people have done the same thing. So to say that affirmative action has gotten us where we are, it's an insult, and it's a way for white people to try to belittle our accomplishments instead of just acknowledging and accepting that maybe we can be accomplished. And maybe you don't realize that's like the most racist, Karenish thing you could say.
Word. This one really resonates with me too, actually, because from both sides, where my white peers will say that, oh, you're applying to law schools. Well, you'll definitely get into some because you're Black and you check off the minority box. That has been, I think, pervasive for any application-oriented activity I've ever done in my life, that someone has said something of that variation to me. But on the flip side too, I've also received comments saying, you know, the only reason that you were elected to this position or appointed to this position from within the Black community is colorism, because you're fair-skinned. That's why you're getting these opportunities and not your darker complexion peers. I think that on both ends, that merit questioning is going on, at least in my experience, being the token in as both being a Black person among white people, but also being a light-skinned Black person among Black people.
I think it's really, for myself, the quote unquote best person for the job, largely. However, my first job out of college was with CBS News in New York. And I was brought into CBS News by way of its intern program, and its intern program was for minority students, for minority college juniors and seniors. And when I graduated, I applied for the internship and got it. And then at the end of September, when that program was over and everybody was going back to school, I didn't have to go back to school. And I did get a job, but it was through the minority internship program. And I believe, I mean, good on CBS to have that. But of course, the small print is that necessary to have the quote unquote numbers that they needed to keep heat off them for not having Blacks in their rank and file. That's, you know, that's not, I didn't read that on paper anywhere, but that's the way I score it. Now, go back the last almost 20 years, and even longer than that, but everything that I've achieved has been based on my merit and based on ability and based on quote unquote being the best person for the position by way of the people that hired me. That's their decision, that's their determination, and not by we need to have this Black man in this job because we need the Black man. We just know that he could be green, he could be purple, he could be orange. He's really the best person, qualified, skilled, etc., for this position.
I lied. That's not the last question. Has anyone felt that they needed to, I guess, overperform or be a top performer as a Black person, kind of stemming out from that, my merit is being challenged?
That's life, man.
Yeah.
You know, sadly, that's life. Sadly, that's life for an African-American Black male or an even female. And Sammy, you probably heard this, you and Natasha, in your household, through your mom and dad. You know, we have to do double. We have to be better 2 times in order to be equal. And that's what, you know, the last month has been about. Sadly, a man had to lose his life for this wake-up call to happen, but the actions going forward are based on inequalities. We shouldn't have to be double better to be equal. That's
sometimes triple and quadruple.
People are realizing that that's garbage now. So you know, that's my take on it, man.
Do you have?
Yeah, no, that's just been my experience certainly throughout like my higher education, just, you know, constantly kind of putting pressure on myself to be excellent at all times. And part of that is you know, just pride, but a big part of that too is identity. You know, the notion that I've kind of vested myself with the responsibility, whether other people have or not, you know, to be a good example of what Blackness can be, you know, for others. So
survival, you know, you're right. How many times have you seen, you know, someone, a white person who literally can't hold a candle to you, excel or even just survive, when you're like, well, why haven't they been rolled up like years ago? Mm-hmm. You know, what is it that keeps them in a job when they absolutely suck and do less than I do, don't do close to what I do? They suck, but they still have this job, and I have to literally, you know, bust my ass to keep this job. Survival.
I think the mention of our industries and current work situations will not have us comment further on that. so that we can stay employed.
Well,
But
you know what? The thing
I
is, though,
see,
Tammy,
I
I need
see
to
your
stop you
point.
really quick, Tammy. There shouldn't be that apprehension anymore. You follow what I'm saying? That's what this is all about. That apprehension, like, oh, I might lose my job for what I say. You know what? That's not the way any longer. That's garbage.
It shouldn't be the way. I mean, in all of our companies, I'm pretty sure that, everyone who's working someplace, we've now had these conversations with our white executives now um, sort of recognizing, well, there's a bigger problem out there, and here's what we're going to do to not be part of the problem, but be part of the solution. And supposedly opening up these, avenues for discussion so that Black employees feel safe to talk. And I can't imagine unless your company was just, bullshitting about that, anything that we say here shouldn't be, used against us. It is simply what we've been not saying out loud that you need to hear anyway. You need to hear this. It's a conversation I had with our last staff meeting. It's one thing to make our working environments safe environments, and shout out to you guys for doing that for us and making our work environments safe environments. But the truth of the matter is we bring in all of our experiences as Black people into the workplace or into our schools. And so it's not enough to make this environment safe. You have to recognize we are bringing in baggage from the outside, and that is going to impact how we are and who we are and how we move in these spaces. And you're going to have to allow you're going to have to allow that in. You can't allow me in and say, leave your baggage at the door. No, I don't get to check my Blackness at the door. It came with me. Like these earrings I'm wearing.
I will say my company has said anything about what's been going on, and that's been pretty disappointing. So if anybody from my company does watch this, yeah, I'm talking about y'all. But yeah, I mean, as I already mentioned, I'm one of very few Black employees there. So I don't know if they just felt that they didn't have a responsibility to mention what's been going on and people's affiliations with police departments and all that. I don't know if that was a reason as to why nothing has been said, but
it's probably fear, because what I'm running into more and more is the white people that I know feeling like they don't know what to say. It's like, well, silence isn't helping.
Right.
Silence isn't helping. Your continued silence really isn't helping. Your silence
up until now, silence is loud.
Yes. Your silence up until now has been loud, but your continued silence in today's environment and what's going on right now is even screaming louder. And you really should say something. It is not for me to teach you. You should have known. Some of this stuff that's coming out now, this really can't be a surprise. Aunt Jemima can't have figured out that they shouldn't have named their pancakes for 130 years and their syrup Aunt Jemima. Uncle Ben's couldn't have. Uncle Ben's has been around for 100 years. You guys are just now figuring out that using an old Black man who was a slave on your packaging is a bad idea. And I'm coming for you, Mrs. Butterworth, because you too. And you guys are just now figuring out. And then there's the whole Thug Kitchen. You guys are just now figuring out. You've been told for 6 to 8 years that naming your cookbook the Thug Kitchen. And before they came out, they were trying to pretend, they were trying not to show their identities because they didn't want anyone to know that they were like 2 or 3 little white kids. Mm-hmm. And then they come out and it's like, oh, well, we're not being insulting. Of course you are. And you knew you were. You knew you were pushing that borderline, but you did it anyway. Now all of a sudden it's like, oh, my bad. My bad. You knew when you did this that it was my bad.
My biggest commentary on the time is, judging by those comments that are laid out in newsletter form or mass emails to the company-wide, the verbiage is one thing, but how long people wait to send these out really just affects me. And yeah, that's all I'm gonna say.
But honestly,
it's current events, like the more that's happening in the news, and then let's throw something together. It doesn't do anything for me if you waited after 3 months and then, okay, let's put something out now. That's not a positive impact.
It's a positive, but it's not. It's like, I'm glad that the change is happening, but damn it, what took you so long?
Yeah.
And don't shine that in my face like, look what we did. I'm sorry. 130 years of 130 years of Aunt Jemima, 130 years. This isn't brand new. You guys didn't just get told about this. Same thing with Uncle Ben's and same thing with Mrs. Butterworth. All of these have to go. And while we're talking about it, let's talk about the Confederate flag. The flag that they claim is heritage. It's the heritage of people who tried to break away from this country to protect slavery. So while you're sitting here talking about Colin Kaepernick being on his knee, disrespecting the flag, yet you'll fly a flag that disrespects this entire country, miss me with all of that. Confederate
That's a whole nother conversation. We don't have the time for that.
No, we don't. No, we don't. But what I'm pointing out is all of these pulling down of these symbols in the name of what we're trying to do right now, it's not too little too late, but it certainly is very, very late. But it's not too little because it needs to happen. To say too little too late implies that it doesn't need to happen. Oh, it definitely needs to happen. What took you so long? So going back to what you said, Natasha, I think that your company hasn't said anything because some of these people don't know what to say and they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. But saying nothing at all is not helpful either. It's time to speak up.
Agreed.
All right, with that, I think it's a good place to close out our very first podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone on this panel, for tokenism and then everything that falls under that umbrella. You know, we have some very layered stories and experiences. So we're excited to tell more stories and do more of these discussions. So tune in for all we have in store. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.